Well, we're here with another episode of Story World. Good to see you, Alex.
Good to see you, Steve. It's been a long time no see.
Yeah, man. I feel like it's been a little while since we got to record, but I'm really excited to dive into this because we're talking about our writing processes.
Mm.
And I think this is going to be maybe one of the most fun ones, at least for me, because I am seriously interested in fiction writing. I want to do it, but I feel so intimidated by it, and I kind of just want somebody to show me the way. How do you do it? And so that's what we're going to be talking about this time. And I'll get to talk a little bit too, I think, about some of the marketing stuff. So that's going to be fun.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it, especially since I only focus on the fiction writing. I've tried writing other stuff, and in college, yeah, I took a speech class, so I had to write some things there. And obviously, you're schooling English papers, and also when went to a Christian school, so I wrote like little sermons that I would give during like student night and stuff like that. But never really got into writing other stuff seriously, just because it's always been fiction that attracted me. So I'm looking forward to seeing if you can rope me in with some interest on your side of things, Steve.
Yeah, yeah. It should be fun. So most of what I write is nonfiction. Well, obviously it's nonfiction, but there are different kinds of writing. So as I started to like line this out, we do try to come to this somewhat prepared, at least with the exception of the world building jam a few weeks ago, which I think just went
Yeah,
live today. As we're recording this, that went live today.
and
Uh,
that was a fun episode. That was so
it
fun to
was
talk about. That was
it
great.
was super fun, and it was a little
I didn't know
nerve-wracking, but also cool with no notes to go
I didn't
into.
know where it was gonna go, and it was fun. It was fun,
Yeah.
Steve.
Well, as I started putting my notes together for this one, I kind of thought, "Oh, okay, well, yeah, this will be simple. I do this every time." And then I got to thinking about, like, all the different kinds of ways that I've honestly been blessed over the years to get to write. It's actually really different. It's different writing a book versus writing a blog article versus writing a sales funnel versus writing an email, even email marketing. It's like all these things are a little different. And so, I've got a couple different processes that I wanna go down today, and I don't know, it's up to you, but I'm thinking maybe I'll just kinda get mine out of the way, and then I wanna let you kinda
Yeah,
steal the show from that.
I think with this, instead of you saying, "Oh, here's how you do one portion of this," let's just go for it. You can go ahead and go down your little trail, then we'll go down mine and see where it goes.
Sweet, sweet, very good, very good. So, I guess the first aspect then that I'll talk about is technical and book writing. So, um, I sort of make a distinction between, like an article and a blog. And so when I say technical writing, I think I almost mean more article writing. And so it's actually I was going to talk to you about this, but I just found out I'm going to get the opportunity to do some freelance journalistic writing for a pretty big Christian magazine coming up soon. So that kind of came out of nowhere. So I'm going to get to exercise this skill a little bit there as well. And so in technical kind of writing and writing books, which I've written 3 books. I'm working on my 4th one now. Well, 2 pretty long ones, and then 2 others that are a little bit shorter. Um, and in that, you really like, at least me, I try to do footnotes. I mean, I try to be very detailed. I try to make it a very, you have the space to be a little bit more logical and to make sure that you can tie up loose ends and make sure all your facts check out and support your arguments as you're going along with enough detail. And so I really appreciate the opportunity to do that. A lot of times when you're writing a blog type of thing, it's like you're really fighting to keep someone's attention. So you have to you know, cut corners here and there, maybe take a shortcut here or there. Versus with technical article writing, usually if somebody's there to read it, like they kind of know what they're getting into, or a book, right? They kind of know what they're getting into. And so you can be a little bit less careful in terms of, um, you know, promoting engagement and stuff when you're doing those kind of things. So what does my process look like for this? Well, some of this stuff is going to be a little bit repetitive, and I apologize for that. But maybe you could draw out some additional layers of detail that I really didn't even think about. With technical and book writing, what I first like to do is outline it. Okay. And that seems like super basic, and it is. But there was a tip that I got from a freelance writer early on when I first started learning about how to write for longer blogs and more article type work and things like that. And it was for people who like didn't really know if they could write a whole bunch on one topic. And what she said, her name was Jordan. The tip she gave, I never forgot it to this day. And it was treat every headline like it was its own blog post, and you'll have plenty of information to share. Because any little headline, any little bit of information, you could always nest that and go a few layers deeper if you're worried about having enough material or being able to support the material. And so I like to outline it first. Like I think it's fair to say that with all of the books that I've written, I've had them outlined at the very least, they've been outlined at the chapter level before I ever started writing the first word all the way through. Many of them.
How specific is your outlining?
Yeah, that's what I'm talking
Oh,
about.
okay, cool.
Um, yeah, yeah, like, so I'm I'm for sure one layer, just with the main chapter, for a book, let's say, for a book. Um, I've definitely got all the chapters lined out, what I wanna talk about first, and typically also, I will go ahead and have one layer deep into those chapters, so between 4 or 5 major headlines for each chapter, so that I kind of like it's almost like before I start writing at all, I'm making sure that I have enough material, right, to actually write an entire book about, um, and it's helpful because then I kinda can see the logic without diving into it further. And, so I found that to be really helpful. And then and again, this might sound kind of obvious, but with articles or with books, once I get that basic outline, I mean, I just kinda start writing. I typically am a start at the beginning and work my way to the bottom kind of writer. I've heard different people give advice about, well, write the easiest chapter first, or I've heard other people say write the hardest chapter first. And I guess ultimately it's about whatever's easiest for you. But since this is my turn to talk, the way I do it is I start at the top and I work my way down to the bottom because that feels the most logical to me. Like I've heard people who say that, oh, you should write your introductions last. If that helps you, you should absolutely do that. If that helps you, the introduction should be the very last thing you write. For me, it's like, now I might go back and tweak that introduction. Like I'm getting ready to finish. It'll probably be around between 50 and 60,000 words, this fourth book that I've been working on. And, as soon as I finish writing it, I will go back and read from the very beginning, and I will have edits. I will have lots of edits and lots of things I wanna change and clarify based on things that have been written later in the book, but ultimately, I feel like starting at the top and then just logically going down is what makes the most sense, in
Yeah,
my mind. Yeah,
yeah, it makes sense to me, Steve.
very good. So, third step of that is I'll evolve the outline, okay? And that's kinda like what I was just talking about there, evolving the outline, but because I do tend to write only that I don't really go beyond that second layer when I'm outlining. So it always has the first layer. So that's the chapters of the book or the main points of
Mhm.
the article. And then I'll have one more layer beyond that. So in nerdy tech terms, I'll have the H1s and the H2s laid out, heading ones and heading twos. But the heading threes and fours, I won't have that stuff lined out. That stuff I sort of free write. I think there's a in fiction there's like a cutesy technical term for free writing versus, like, outlining. I don't know what that term is, I can't remember it,
I'll get
trying
to
to
it.
think about it. Okay, you'll get to it. Anyway, regardless, so that's what so I evolve the outline from there, right? So I very much will write and it will come to me. Like, a perfect example of this, if I could share a specific example real quick, would be, so I'm working on this last chapter, and I had the content, like I said, planned out. I've been planning to write and I'll just be specific. The specific chapter is, it's chapter 7 of this book, and it's the title of the chapter, at least the working title, is Connecting to God Through His Word. Okay, but chapter 4 of the book was From Truth to Transformation. And so both chapters sort of had the same initial, like, idea of, okay, well, in the which the thesis of the book is about, it's about learning to actually love engaging with the Bible. Okay, that's basically what the book is about. And so both chapters have a little bit of a flavor of this idea that in order to like really apply this in your life, you have to move beyond just like nerd stuff and like scholarship. You actually have to like have a relationship with the Lord. And as I started writing chapter 7, I was like, oh man, this is quickly like encroaching on chapter 4 stuff. But I I I mean something different here. So I didn't know what it was. And so I thought about it. And what I discovered is that I thought about, well, in number 4, chapter 4, I'm really talking about like that specific daily like interaction, like practical Bible study stuff to like really get close to Jesus. Whereas I want to talk about like that really cosmic level, like the meta narrative, and where you connect into God, into the story really that God's writing. That's what chapter 7's about. And then it hit me. Now you're in the you're in class with me, at our small group at our church, and we went through a book called The Explicit Gospel, and the distinction was made between the gospel from the air and then the
Yeah.
gospel on the ground. And so I borrowed that distinction. I gave credit to where credit was due, but borrowed that distinction in the book, and that, my friend, that literally opened up the floodgates. I went a couple layers deep and outlined the rest of that chapter, and now it's like so like I'm writing it and it's so clear. I've been able to just mow through it because it's so clear what that chapter really should be about. And so that's kind of what I mean by evolve the outline. Like it's for me, it has to move, it has to morph, and it has to still fit within the rest of the book. I couldn't just rewrite chapter 4 again. uh
Okay, gotcha.
that wouldn't have been fair, you know? So
Hmm,
and then
interesting.
the last step of that process, is to, I mean, pretty simple, just to break for editing and proofing. So I definitely think it is a, fact they say don't write with your left brain and your right brain at the same time. I have a hard time, like if you stop every time you're in that creative jive and then you stop to edit, you're activating the other half of your brain, and you can get out of that flow. So I really do try to just write creatively on the one side, and then every, I don't know, 30 minutes or so, if I'm really in a groove, I'll zoom back out a little bit and go through to make sure that what I wrote made sense, and then I'll edit it during that time as well for basic grammar and proofreading and stuff. Um, and that's it. That's technical and book writing. That's how I approach that piece of it.
That's
Does that make
interesting.
sense?
Yeah, no, I like it. How do you find that after, for example, for like one of your books that you've written, do you find that when you do go back and edit that you're cutting out a lot of material, changing a lot of material, adding a lot, or is it usually pretty good even after
Mm,
your first draft?
yeah. So it's pretty good. But I'm not saying that it that I that it should be that way. Like, so I've heard, I've obviously, studied a lot about this because I really like to do things with some semblance of how other people do it as well, just so I'm modeling what works and not reinventing the wheel. But I hear people talk a lot about, like, almost entirely rewriting their books, even, like, 3 or 4 times, and now it's probably why some of these people are on New York Times bestseller lists and I'm not, but I have yet to see the need for that level of rewriting when I'm writing my material. Like, feel like I'm getting the point across pretty well. I'm not cutting out large sections. I have done that a little bit in the past, but even after having like the big book that I wrote, I mean, it's big. It's 300 pages. I mean, for a nonfiction book, it's fairly decent.
Yeah.
Um, and I had multiple people proofread that. I read it, God knows how many times. And yeah, there were some edits and some clarifications, things that needed to be changed, but overall, it's it seemed to work. I mean, the logic was there and everything
Yep.
was on point.
Cool.
So it's mostly tying up loose ends, and honestly, it takes me a little while, especially for a book specifically. It takes me a little while to write one. I mean, I've been working on this one since 2020 just because I have so many other commitments. And so what's interesting is from the time I started writing something, and this has happened with both of my big books, from the time I started writing something until when I'm going back and doing a lot of the rereading, I've changed. I've grown.
Yeah.
I
Yep.
have I have further distinctions. I wouldn't, even if I believe the same way about something, I wouldn't couch it in the same terms. I would explain it way differently or nuance it a lot differently.
Yeah. And
And
just
so
for the
you just
span
actually
of like
grow as a
2 or 3
person.
years. It's not even like decades that you change. It's
That
a couple of years that you can.
that's right. And so there's actually, I thought about this. It actually kind of terrifies me, to have stuff out there, right? Because it's like
Yeah.
you're just not always going to agree with what you've said in the past, and especially since I'm, I mean, I have many different sorts of platforms, business related and spiritually and stuff like that. And I just, what I don't want to do is lead somebody astray. And you know what I'm saying? Like, I wanna be very careful about it, so it scares me to think that, like, "Oh, man, in 5 years, am I gonna believe, like, totally differently about X, Y, or Z?" So I wanna be really careful about that stuff.
I think that is a kind of going down a little rabbit trail. That's one of the big reasons why I like the idea of like writing nonfiction about a certain subject because I like a lot of subjects. We've talked a lot about different books about theology and this and that, and I read it and I really get into it. But I am much more of a discuss it in a small group or discuss it one on one or with a couple people and really get into the nitty gritty of it and challenge our thoughts and discover versus writing on a topic or especially teaching on a topic, even if I'm very familiar with it and even if I'm confident in how I feel about it and my beliefs and what I think is right or wrong, um, it's not that I'm worried about being wrong or that I'm worried about later. It's just I never feel like why would I tell someone my thoughts on something or why would I tell
Yeah.
someone about something that I'm still figuring out or that I'm still challenging myself. That's why I like
Yeah.
those discussion type things because you can say, "Hey, I'm not sure about this, but what do you think?" If you're teaching a
Yeah.
lesson,
I
though, it's
agree.
kind of hard to, depending on the setting, to get up there and be like, "Well, I don't really know what I'm talking about, but here's what I've thought about," and people are gonna be sitting there
Yeah.
thinking, "Well, I was hoping to learn something tonight."
Well, and I'll say 2 very quick things about that. Thing 1 is, I mean, as far as from the spiritual perspective goes,
Yeah.
I mean, in the King's English, in the book of James, it says, "Be ye not many masters." And what it's talking about is that, there is a harsher measure of judgment, or a one way to put it would be a stricter sense of responsibility that is for those who aim to teach, right? So it's a
Mm,
burden.
yeah.
Somebody at church said this the other night when they were teaching, like, everybody wants to be behind the pulpit, but it's like, it's a burden. Um,
Uh,
and that's right. I mean, yeah, sure. It's nice to, like, to really, I mean, admittedly, and I'll just be honest. I mean, admittedly, I do feel like I get to play an important role in the life of our church because I get to speak. And that, I mean, that's huge for me. Because I feel like God wants me to do it. At the same time, it is a burden that, like, I wouldn't do it if I didn't feel like God
mm,
wanted me to do it. Um, so that is important. The other thing I'll say about that is my favorite way that people teach, my favorite kind of teacher is the less dogmatic one. The one who will say, here's this view, here's this view, here's this view, here's why I believe this view, here's why I don't believe this view or this view. Um, but I could be wrong. That's my favorite kind of teacher. You show me a teacher who will just be honest about the positions, who understands the positions well enough to put them all out there, and then come in and say, "This is why I believe this one. Now let's talk about it." That, to me, that's the kind of teacher I always strive to be. Now, there's some things that you're going to be dogmatic on, but most things are more like that.
for if that's the kind of setting that I like, especially if I were to lead a group in a way, it would be like that. Like, I was watching a video on YouTube the other day. I think it was from the is it the Southern Seminary? Is that the I think that's what
Southern
they
Evangelical
call it.
Seminary, SES.
No, I think it was
No,
something else.
might be
They were I think they were in charge
Southern
of writing
Baptist
the
Theological
CSB
Seminary.
of the CSB translation. I think that's
Oh,
I think it was the Southern
uh,
Seminary. I could be wrong though.
yeah, it might be Southern Seminary.
But
Yeah.
anyway, one of the guys in there was talking about like pre-millennium, post-millennium, and then
Oh, yeah.
millennium. About I think that means no millennium or whatever. But
Millennium.
yeah, maybe it is. But
Oh, yeah.
anyway, he was going through like 3 or 4 different things, and he made a really good case for one. He said that it's a very strong argument for this. It makes a lot of sense. And then he said, I
Yeah.
personally think this way, and it was totally different, even though I thought he was making a case for that one. And that's a
Definitely.
really good way to really just show that you understand all viewpoints. And
Yeah.
then one, you're not closed minded, but you still have a firm opinion on what you think is right and you communicate it. In my opinion, that's
Yeah.
kind of the way to do it. But anyway, we can move
Yeah.
on. No. A good
Very
little
good.
rabbit trail there.
No, it was good. Yeah.
Um,
Good discussion.
so,
Um,
um, I know you have a few things because you have different topics you'll be talking about. I have the one based on kind of fiction writing, but to switch it up, I guess we could kind of talk about my couple points on
yeah.
my writing process, if that sounds good.
Yeah.
If we
That
can go
nope,
back to
totally
you.
good with that.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a few different terms for it. But gardener and architect are the one that I hear the most on the different kind of writing styles, especially as it applies to fiction writing. So a lot of people listening probably know it too, but gardener is you if you outline, it's mostly major points and you're not really focused on getting down the specifics. You kind of maybe see where you want to go and you have an idea of some thematic elements and, critical points and climaxes in your book. But for the most part, as a garden grows and things, change and you tend to it, that's kind of the outlook where you'll be writing and then something might pop up and a thought about this character. And so you kind of tend to that. And then you go this way to this character. And then you might be a tenth of the way through the book and realize, oh, I might actually want this character to be involved this way. And then you go back and you might change some things and you help it to grow a different way. And so um that's actually how I tried writing for a while, and I think that's why I was really frustrated with writing because that's just not how my brain's wired. I think I want it to be. I don't know why. It's just this kind of my approach that I wanted to do, and it did not work, and I felt burnt out, and it frustrated me because I kept going back and editing, and it was very frustrating. The second is the architect, and that is very much in my line where I won't outline every single thing. I mean, at that point, you're just wasting time, but I very much plan on what I'm writing. I have a very detailed outline, especially in the ending of the book and highlights and points and how I want the characters to be. Do a, I kind of write my story before I even write my story in a big outline form. And it takes up quite a bit of writing to get there. But the first thing I start with, and maybe it's not, it's kind of different, but I start with the world. Um, for me, if I start with characters or if I start with, like for instance, if I start with a conflict, I like to see an overall conflict on, not necessarily specifically what's happening to that specific character, but might be causing like for instance, the war going on in Ukraine right now. That's a big overarching problem. But some people specifically in the city are, hey, my house is trampled. I don't have food. I don't have water. That's their specific conflict. And so if I'm looking at the overall conflict, I like to know, well, why is it that way? How come this person is behaving this way? Or these nations are attacking or fighting? How come this magic system is dead here, but alive here? And so for me, I have to think about a believable world and really come up with a good, not detailed magic system at this point, but just, um, generally speaking, what's the world set up like? Are there different races? Are they, how they interact? And when I kind of think on some interesting ideas, then I kind of go back a little bit more and think, okay, well, how did this end up coming down? And m- 90, probably more, 95% of this stuff I don't write on paper. I just think about it in my mind and it kind of grows that way. But if I do think of a specific idea, for instance, if I think about maybe a fight that happened between a god and a normal man, and this was the result of it, I think, ooh, maybe I can apply that to maybe that's how that changed the magic system, and that's how that will be affecting one of my main characters. And then I'll write that down because it's a good idea.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
Um, so this is great. I mean, this is like I'm soaking this in. It's fantastic.
Good.
I have no idea if the question I'm going to ask is going to make any sense, but I promise I'm going to do my best
Bring
to
it on.
ask it. Well, okay. So like when I'm a marketing guy, entrepreneur, I have a working genius type, which I talked about on a
Yep.
past episode of basically I'm a creative dreamer, right? So I'm all the time building these worlds in my, in my head, kind of like you are, right? We're actually doing very similar stuff. In my mind, I am but they're things that happen in the real world, and it's like, oh god, I hate to rabbit trail, but
No, you're
it's
good.
like it's like a dinner the other night. I was telling
Yeah.
you we were at the Mexican restaurant, and I was telling you about this one specific thing, right? And what I was telling you about is how I wish that there was an app on my Apple Watch. It's already smart enough to know when I go to sleep. I said, I looked and everybody's asking for it, but nobody makes it. I just want something where I can say I want to get 6.5 hours of sleep at least every night, no more than 8. Since when I fall asleep, automatically set my alarm clock for the next morning,
Mm,
right? Now, when I think about that, like, I can if I'm not careful, I can, like, get so preoccupied in my mind and obsessed with just, like, the different variables and the different ways, but, like, that's something in the real world, and there is a measure of reality to it that I know like, I have dreams and ideas of things that I want to instantiate in the real world
yes. Yes.
eventually.
Mhm.
Big big things, like, I have an idea for basically a Great Wolf Lodge type of thing that I don't even know if I've ever told this, but it's like I have an idea for, like, this Great Wolf Lodge type of thing, which if you don't know, it's like this awesome, like, themed hotel for kids, but that teaches, like, creation and, like, biblical worldview
Mm,
stuff, okay? So, I can get excited about that, but, like, right now, like, what it would take to make something like that is so far-fetched
crazy. Yeah.
that, like, I don't it doesn't feel real, and so I can't waste too much mental capital on it.
Right.
But, like but when I think about things like the watch idea or the idea I was telling you about literally right before this stream about, my god, a simple screen recorder that would just allow me to switch
Mhm.
between full camera and just the little tutorial thing window in the bottom corner. Like, I get really excited about that, and I think about world building around these different types of concepts. What my question is what, like, for you, what makes you have that aha moment? Like, what things when you're thinking about it is like, "Ah, this has to be in my world." And, like, why that excitement and why that thing like, is there anything about it that makes you like, you think of something where it's like, that may or may not work," but then you think of something and you're like, "Oh, that's it." Like, here's the problem. For me, like, with marketing, I'm usually thinking in terms of, "Would somebody buy that?" And it's like, so there's realistic things in my mind, something like that I can grab on. Like, yeah, somebody would totally pay $2 in the app store for an app that automatically set your alarm clock based on when you fell asleep. That's in the real world to me. And so I think, like I could, if I just had some capital to like pay a developer, I could make that. Versus like, you don't get that with fiction, right? So like, how do you tap into that? Yes, this is
Eh,
going to work or this is not going to work. How do you do that?
so obviously you don't plan for aha moments, but I
Oh,
wish you could. And then
fair enough.
yeah.
Right. Fair enough.
So
Yeah.
any aha moments that I ever have relate because of my focus, I think it should be kind of focus of every book, and typically with good writers it is, but focus is on your character development and their emotions and them being human and them
Mm.
going through their character arc and becoming, who you want them to be on their journey. So my moments are when I think of something, especially when it relates to the setting or the magic system or a situation or like maybe how two different characters were upbringing. And I'll just have a thought on, wow, like if the magic was created this way and the person can use it to do this, then it would make, this person feel, happy about this and help them overcome that challenge. To try to think of a specific example of giving anything away from my book, I was thinking about kind of how like two different worlds could collide, how someone could like live in, I guess, two different places at once. I'm not trying to, it seems weird. I'm not trying to get away anything, but just for sake of example, and how one place could affect them at the same time as another, but in different ways. And I just had an aha moment where, well, a lot of times, like we put on a front of ourselves where we're happy, but we have such an internal struggle going on about something and no one knows about. We bottle it in, and that manifested into actively how this person would behave in each of their worlds and the results of that. And I just thought, wow,
Oh,
that's really cool.
cool.
And that's without giving anything specific. That might not sound,
Sure.
but that's usually, and anytime I have something like that, I'll show you sometime, Steve. I'll show you like my outline and different
Yeah,
things
for
I've
sure.
highlighted. But I will have a thought. I'm like, I need to put that down because that needs to be in my book. And it,
So, without trying to over formalize it, okay, which I don't think formalize is a word, probably formulate anyway. Um, to be fair, I am looking at a book in my Kindle called "Save the Cat Writes a Novel" that is literally
there you go.
a formalization
There you
of
go.
the fiction writing process. So I feel somewhat justified. Is it, without making it too systematic, is it fair to say that um a lot of the, like, those aha moments or those things that, like, really help tie the disparate things together, like what you just explained right
Yeah.
there was like a piece of missing logic or something that, like, once you, like that sort of helped things make, like, tie it all together. Are many of them that sort of thing where it
Yeah.
just kinda makes multiple parts make sense?
The best thing is having multiple parts make sense and then like solving like two problems at once, if you will.
Gotcha,
So
okay.
I'm trying to think of example quick off of my head, and I really can't. But instead of if someone wants to say, you know, fall in love with this other character, right? Instead of it just being simple, where we kept asking her out, they went on a couple dates, and blah blah blah, they fell in love. How about instead, um, like her lover gets assassinated and it somehow relates to how his life as a simple peon gets involved and he ends up
Yeah.
I don't know, like maybe he brings this person back to life or something. I don't know. But like if you can solve something like twice, so if you can like bring two people into their lives together that you want them to, while also them like discovering how part of the magic system works. So if you can do two or three things at once, it's the same thing for comics. What's the guy's name that writes Silver something Adams? I think
Who
Greg
writes what?
Adams, Dilbert.
Greg Adams? Oh, that sounds familiar.
Um,
I
it's one
know
of my favorite
Dilbert, but
comics.
I d
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
I forget his name. Maybe it's not, but he always says that the best thing is when he can have like three different layers of jokes. So it's I've read some of his articles on his favorite car of his favorite snippets, and obviously you're trying to fit like funny stuff into three or four panes. And he says if you can add like three layers to a joke and pull it off in within three or four panes, it's phenomenal. So I'm sorry I can't come up with a specific example, but that's why it's an aha moment. I'll be writing and I'll outline, and then all of a sudden I'll think, well, that doesn't really work. What if I did this? And then all of a sudden it'll just poof in my head like, wow, if I did do this, then that would bring all of this together.
Okay, cool. Now, I feel like I'm treating this like a fiction coaching session. Um, do you, are you gonna dig more into the outline? Or if I have outline questions,
I
should I
am.
ask that now?
No, I am.
Okay. Okay,
Yeah.
alright, fantastic.
Yeah.
I'll let you keep trucking then.
Yeah. So I'm almost done with this little first little thing. After the world
Okay.
building, and this kind of goes with it, I think of the overall conflict, which makes sense. So for instance, in Lord of the Rings, uh, you have I mean you have the start of the world and you have the Valar and you have Morgoth who's the evil person and I mean just all this evil and the good and the struggle and then it all dwindles down to the second age, then the third age and it gets all the way down to where the Lord of the Rings takes place. And I mean Sauron is evil, no doubt, but Morgoth was even worse and the world had seen far worse in the um, during the first age. Yet when we watch Lord of the Rings, all of that is really just a small piece of the result of the thousands of years that have happened beforehand. So there's your conflict in Lord of the Rings. So that's what I think about. So I'll think of my world. I'll think of how the big overarching picture, what happened thousands of years ago, how did it affect this? And it dwindles down to, okay, here's the world now. What is the conflict now? And how did that arise from everything? So
Okay.
even though I
Re
won't,
real
yeah, go
Yeah,
for it.
go ahead. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Even though I won't explain not even a tenth of that, not even a fraction of it to my
Yeah.
readers, it makes the world real. You can watch Lord of the Rings, not know anything about the Silmarillion, and be totally fine because you know what's happening in Lord of the Rings. But Lord of the Rings wouldn't
So,
be possible unless he created the world in which that fits.
that makes sense to me. I'm interested in the word conflict. I like the word, it makes sense.
Yep.
My question is that a like, a story doesn't exist without it? It's like, it's not just the type of book that you write that needs conflict. Is that I mean, is it fair to say that that's just what stories are? Is that what makes them interesting? Is that there's conflict? Is there always conflict?
Yeah, I think there has to be.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because it makes a lot of sense to hear you say that, but I think like this is actually one of the things that have given me a mental block from even trying to get started on like where do you start, right? Where do you even start creating something? And I think conflict is the central thesis in a sense. I mean, it's kind of like if you don't have a story without like a conflict, well, I mean, you just can't, right? If you can't have a story without a conflict, then you kind of need to start there. I
And
mean, yeah, of course, it has to have characters, has to have a world,
right.
but can't your conflict
That
almost define many of those other
that
elements for you?
that's why I start with the conflict first. And again, that I'm not saying this is the right way. There's so many everyone's different. There's so many ways to write. This is just how I write, but that's why I start with not the
Yeah.
specific character's conflict. So, for instance, the conflict in The Hobbit is Bilbo is going on an adventure with the dwarves to take back Erebor and help the dwarves out. But the main conflict that's overcoming that is at the same time Sauron is coming up to power and all this stuff is happening, but you don't even see that, but it's there still. And so
Yeah.
for me, especially in epic fantasy where it usually comes down to the fate of the world. That's usually what it comes down to. So the
Mhm.
overall conflict will eventually manifest itself to the main character, especially in a long book series. So I start with the main conflict. So here's this village eventually where my main characters are going to start, let's say I focus first on, okay, what is this territory over here doing to affect them right now? What is the main struggle here that's affecting them? If you want to write a story about a farmer in Ukraine and trying to, tend to his crops, what's the main struggle right now? Well, it's the war in Ukraine. Okay, so he might have some specific stuff, even if he's not even close to the war. Maybe he's on the western side and he's dealing with family issues that live on the east, where the war, is where the struggle is really happening. I instead of worrying about the farmer first and what I'm gonna tell about him, I focus on what is happening in the world now and what I kinda want the main conflict to be that eventually the main characters will get involved in. And again, that's more on the epic side of things. You don't have to have a story with an epic conflict like that. For instance, I guess, like The Count of Monte Cristo, that's a great story with a great conflict. Has nothing to do about changing the world or fighting, like the king or emperor or taking over a kingdom. It's a more personal conflict, but with epic storytelling, I start with the main overarching conflict first. There's a term for it too, but I forget what it is.
So, um, this is so cool because I've been thinking about like we've been binging 24, and the funny thing about 24 is it's like Russian dolls, like you like again I think they kind of like figured out a formula that worked early on, and then like the show took off, and so they basically just follow that formula for the rest of the shows. Especially if you're an attentive person to story, like I am, you're going to pick up on the patterns pretty quickly. And what tends to happen is like the conflict that's introduced in the very beginning
Hmm.
usually gets resolved
Quickly.
about half. Well, I mean, ish. I would
Yeah.
say
In the grand scheme,
fully.
in the
I,
grand
I
scheme
would
of
I would say that initial conflict fully gets resolved about halfway through, but
things.
maybe about a third of the way through or so, they start introducing like strands of like the big final conflict. And what's interesting is it's like you'll right. So just when you feel like you basically feel like the show is getting ready to come to an end,
Yeah.
and then a whole other window of things opens up. And I've been thinking like, how do they do that? Like,
Yeah.
how do they write these like 8 24 episode seasons with, hour-long episodes with all this stuff going on? And I think conflict is, I mean, I know there's multiple things here, but I think conflict is a lot of the answer to that because it seems like you can just nest conflict. Like you can start with this overarching conflict and you can create other threads of conflict by just sort of working backwards and saying, well, how would this thing over here? How can we create a conflict over here that like in a sense serves the master conflict in this way? And when you do that across a few characters, it's kind of like there's your
Yeah.
story.
I
Not to
hate
oversimplify it, but
Yeah. I hate using, like, the term never and always, I really do, but I'm trying to think of a scenario where, like, for instance, if you really wanna have that satisfaction of the personal development of the growth of characters while also overcoming if you do have an epic story of, like, the fate of the world or the fate of the kingdom, Even though I don't really care too much for like comic stuff and like the Marvel, but the MCU did it perfectly. It took them a decade, and it started with Iron Man, and that was a pretty simple story. And then look at what the end result was.
Yeah,
Literally the fate of the universe. It was what it came down to.
man.
And so, in my opinion, this is where I hate to say always, but I would think that in most cases, in Brandon Sanderson's books and Harry Potter, the 7 books, to really get that full accomplishment, it takes more than a book. It takes more than one movie. It takes several movies. It
Yeah,
takes several books. That's just in my opinion to tell a story that
yeah.
epic. Um,
Cool.
but yeah, I think the last thing about that is just I think a great example of that is Dune. Um,
Huh.
I mean, yeah, before House Atreides arrived on the planet, everything was still happening there without them. You had the desert, you had the spice, you had already conflict going on there between the people that lived in the desert, the free I think they're called the Freemen. Yeah, it's been a while since I've read and watched it. And so you have all this stuff already there, and yet Paul, the main character of the movie, isn't even there yet. And so
Right.
Frank Herbert set up this world separate from even the main characters. That world exists without them. And so that's how I kind of look at setting up my world before I even introduce the main characters to them. So that finishes up kind of where my
That makes a lot of
start
sense.
is.
Cool. All right, well, let's talk about some really boring email and blog writing real quick, and then we'll get back
Okay.
into this
Oh, I can't,
story
I
stuff.
can't wait to see.
I told you I was way more excited about your stuff than mine. But well, because it's just not as interesting. Anyway,
So
so
to
uh,
be honest
yeah,
though, I'm
yeah,
not gonna lie, maybe talking about the fiction stuff is more interesting. So fiction is interesting. Look at like the MCU, Star Wars,
yeah.
look, that's just naturally how it is. And I was talking to you before we started recording. I've learned so much about presenting myself, about
Mm.
how I want to set up my personal story and build my world so that when I do um finish my book and try to get to publish and finish my video game, that I already have a platform. And so really what you talk about is like really invaluable knowledge. Like we're getting free knowledge just listening to you talk, and it really
Yeah.
is super beneficial.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I mean I actually did a podcast on this earlier today. The question was how important is design, and because in my world, people are really obsessed with like pretty things, right? They want a pretty website, they want pretty
Right,
graphics,
right.
they want pretty thumbnails for their YouTube. And if I can remember the three things that I said, and I said, look, here's the thing, like design, um, it captures attention. Design is sticky, right? Like for example, like a lot of people continue using Apple products, start and continue using Apple products because they're well designed, right? So design can make you stick around in somebody's world. And there was one other thing I said as well. But words sell. All design is great for all those other things, but design itself does not sell. The only time when design sells is when you have like a brand or something where there are words that have been associated with that brand that make
With the
people think of
product. Yeah.
certain feelings. Yeah, like Nike or whatever, you know? And so it needs words. And so the irony is that in order to you've got all this great fiction, but in order to sell it, you have to have the other kind. You have
Yeah.
to have the words like I'm talking about to get the other stuff, out there, right? At least in this day and age. So it's just interesting. So real quick, email and blog writing. This one won't take long. Begin with a topic. That's pretty clear. Um, because you have to have a topic. I mean, you have to be starting somewhere before you start writing anything else. That seems fairly self-explanatory. You got to know what you want to talk about.
I
The
assume when you
first
talk
thing,
about email, you're talking about like a newsletter kind of to like keep
so
with time.
I should have clarified that. So yes, I mean
Okay.
like a even maybe a newsletter, but maybe even just like a normal like weekly email that you might get from a brand, especially in like the info space. So if
Yeah.
you ever follow info marketers and stuff and you're on their email list, a lot of times they will write you every week at least. And that's the kind of thing I'm talking
Yeah.
about. Um when I'm writing emails. And you can write emails for sales and write emails for content and consistency. And those are a little different, but I'm thinking here more of content emails and some of this. You would do some of the stuff. I'm going to talk about marketing copywriting here in a minute. And if you were going to write a sales email, you would just do a lot of the things. You would just
Mm.
kind of combine the two, right? So now sometimes what I do that is maybe a little controversial, but I think it would only be controversial because because people don't really understand what it is. Um, uh, sometimes I use what's called Jasper.ai, which is an AI writing assistant. Now, two quick caveats, real quick. Number one, I did not use such a thing for the vast majority of the time when I've been writing. I mean, I think I've been a member of this thing since, like, I think I've had it since like last fall, maybe. Um, and so the vast majority of my life writing, I had nothing like this. And the second caveat is that it's really important that people understand that it is a AI, so artificial intelligence writing assistant. All three of those words are very important. Um, because when I first found this, I thought, well, great. Now the robots are taking the writing away, so we're all screwed, right? Like the last thing was human creativity and being able to write and things like that. And the reality is that is so far from the truth because you can't use them like that. It's actually a skill to learn how to use an AI writing assistant. And so what I use it for is two main things. So when you're doing the kind of writing that I do, there is and to be honest, some of this is true about fiction, like I was just saying, is it's more formulaic than most people realize,
Yeah.
especially when you're doing copywriting. It's, creativity a lot of times is the enemy. Like, when you're inventing the wheel and trying to do all new stuff, that's actually the enemy because there are some proven frameworks that people respond to and that generate sales and that facilitate connection. And so, yes, you should put your own voice in. You should put your own spin on the information. You should teach your own frameworks, but you should do so with the ever, with the just the awareness that like there are just a few frameworks that work, right? Pass, problem, agitate, solve. That is a timeless framework that will always work in marketing. It will just always work. There's AIDA, AIDA, attention, interest, desire, action. That will just always work in marketing. There's a framework called the before after bridge or another script called star story solution. There's all these different scripts that you can plug your information into, and you should, because if you like to sell your thing and you don't want to reinvent the wheel, you should do what works already. And so a tool like this will help you um, do things like that. Will help you plug original information into proven frameworks. That's maybe a good way of putting it.
Mm.
Another thing that I like to specifically use it for is to just spark creativity and generate ideas. General ideation and stuff. It's like, I mean, my gosh, there's nothing worse as a nonfiction writer of any kind than a blinking cursor. It's the worst thing in the world. And so, like a lot of times I'll get the writing assistant to spark some ideas my way, and then I'll totally erase what it wrote and run with the idea that the general direction because it prompted that general direction and then I'll run from there. So I don't even use this all the time. Sometimes I go ahead and use it both almost just as like a placebo effect. Like I'll go ahead and I actually do most of my long form writing now in the tool, but a lot of times I don't need to end up using the tool. I just go ahead and write my own stuff and I just keep it handy in case I need to hit Command J on my keyboard to like give me some ideas. And a lot of the time I don't even do it. So when I'm doing content writing, plus the reality is it's just faster. Like if you actually do use it, and which there's nothing wrong with it. There's plagiarism checkers in there and
Mm.
everything. You can actually use it to go ahead and write really good content that you just need to do some editing to and structure. And like I said, it's a skill to learn how to use it. And you can put out great work faster. So it's a business tool, it's a productivity tool. So sometimes when I'm doing email and blog writing, I will use an AI writing assistant. Most of the time not. Sometimes I do. Um, and I will say also that with a tool like that, like if I'm doing a blog for my ministry or something, for example, I don't do that. This is more like for things that there is plenty of knowledge and business like more objective things that are out there on the internet or whatever that it can pull data and information from. It's harder to do with
Mm.
certain kinds of subject matter. It's harder to use them for because it's not a fact checker, right? Like it will actually write factually incorrect things
Mm.
because it's
Yeah.
not a human. It doesn't
Right.
have right. It will write factually incorrect things and it will even totally make up stories for you if you ask it to, right? So there's that. Um, Usually this kind of writing is more off the cuff, so it's less planned. I'm not going through wasting all this time outlining. I'm really just kind of writing and letting the words go where they go. And depending on like a lot of different factors, depending on how well I know the subject matter, depending on if I'm using Jasper or whatever, I can bang out a couple 3,000 words in an hour or two of writing, depending on the subject matter.
Should this
Uh,
kind of form of writing, either like in a blog post or an email, should it have more of an informal feeling then for the most part?
um, yes, it depends on um, so your education versus inspiration are you write differently depending. I mean, obviously, when I say inspiration, that might not be clear. Um, Frankly, it depends on how salesy you're trying to be, is what I'm trying to say. If you're trying to be more educational, you can typically write in like larger paragraph blocks. You can do less typography emphasis and stuff like that. If you're trying to be educational, but with that spin towards action taking,
Hmm.
then you're gonna write even this sort of helpful content, in a structured typographical way. That sounds really nerdy, but in a way that where you're using bold and emphasis and big letters and short paragraphs, short sentences, and things like that to keep movement going, because all the while, like, every line has to sell the next line. Right? Like,
Yeah.
the job of this line is to sell the line below it and to get them to keep reading because they could be less interested versus if it's something like, my gosh, like, you would go to an article about the Lord of the Rings that just had complete walls of text because you love the Lord of the Rings, and you will read that, and it might be hard for you to read, but you will suffer through it anyway. A lot of the times when you're doing especially when you're doing marketing relating stuff at all, it's not like that. You have to you have to do a good job at selling,
Yeah.
the fact that somebody should be reading it. Um, all the way through it. You should be doing that. So, informal, yes. I mean, don't use big words. I mean, for God's
Right.
sakes. I mean, Donald Trump, I'm telling you, he of I think there are many different reasons, but
Yeah.
one reason that he won the election, objectively speaking, in 2016 is because he spoke at a 3rd grade level. You know what's funny? All his opponents made fun of him for that. But all the marketers know that's why he won,
Yep.
because he speaks the language of the people.
Yep.
So, anyway, just say not to be political here, I'm just saying, objectively speaking, even I even have a book who's written by a guy who doesn't like Trump. The title of the book is Win Bigly, and the point is, look, I don't like the guy, but here's like,
Here's
this
what.
is why he is who he is, right? So that's all very, important. So these are more off the cuff, right? Less formal, less technical. And then I do break often for editing and proofing, because these are also typically shorter,
Right.
five,
Gotcha.
3 to 800 words or
Yeah.
well,
Spending a month editing
1,000 to
here.
3,000
Yeah.
words. Yeah, this is a couple hours, right? And so, or less, maybe even less.
Yep.
Um, I guess let me go through just, I'll get the rest of my marketing copywriting out of the way. Is that cool? And then you can
That's
get
fine.
back
Yeah,
into the
go for
fiction.
it.
Does that
Absolutely.
work?
Well, yeah, I would
Okay.
be able to do it for sure.
Okay. So marketing copywriting, there's really like a few big pieces to this. So one of them is you got to have a hook. So
Can you
typically,
define marketing copywriting first?
uh
I just
I can. Yes,
okay.
yes, I can.
Okay.
I can. So copywriting is writing, especially, marketing copywriting
Right.
is you're writing to provoke a response. Okay. So a lot of times, so a way that I could put this more formally is direct response copywriting. So the idea is you're writing, this is not, even though it could loosely be considered copywriting, what I'm talking about is not the kind of thing that you would see on a billboard going down the side of the road necessarily, right? Or on a Geico commercial or anything like that. This is imagine if you took something like an infomercial, like a late night TV infomercial, and wrote it on a website page. This is
Yeah.
more what I'm talking about. Okay. This is where the way you are writing is meant to provoke an immediate response. So that you can track and measure what's going on and figure out, right. So it's not advertising, it's direct response marketing.
Gotcha.
Okay. So by far the most important part of copywriting at all, like this is 50%. Seriously, if you can get good at this first part, you can almost suck at the rest and be okay. Is the headline, or what we call the hook. Okay. And the hook has to have an angle and a payoff. That's simple. There has to be an angle to the marketing, and the angle is sort of, it's a little amorphous, but it's like it's the thing that, like, it that gives you that emotional feeling. It's the completion of the argument. Like, what's an example of something I can pull out here? So I have this, I'm working on this mentorship program for my web design stuff. So a lot of people ask me, "Hey, how did you build a successful business? Will you help me?" And so I put together this thing. And so um I'm actually gonna, for anybody who sees this on YouTube eventually in the future, when I get my lazy butt, and get everything actually going on here, I'm gonna go ahead and put it on video. But that way, at least you can see it too, so we can kind of jam on it. And so my hook for this website says this: "No nonsense digital business expert reveals how to build a successful web design business without charging extravagant fees. Even if you have virtually no experience, are scared to charge customers for your work." Oops, I got random emojis on my screen. And have no earthly idea how or where to find clients. So that whole thing together is an angle. Um, like it's kind of like, I don't know. It's hard to explain, right? It's the whole argument together is the angle. The angle is that this no nonsense digital business expert is going to show you how to build a six-figure business without charging extravagant fees, even if you've got no experience. Like, you see how that whole thing is like a logical unit of thought. That's the angle. And it could have been something entirely different. Like, let's see if I go here. Let's see if this is an active site. I think it is. Okay. So share this type of stuff. So I'm gonna show you one here of, let's see, you seeing this? Okay. Yeah. Okay. So on this is the most incredible free gift ever, designed to help make you maximum money in minimum time. So so this whole idea here, it starts with this little guy up here. Why did Dan Kennedy, aka the renegade millionaire maker, come out of retirement and team up with Russell Brunson, the co-founder of ClickFunnels, to create the most incredible free gift ever, et cetera, et cetera? That is the angle. Now, inside of this angle, there's a payoff. The payoff is maximum money in minimum time. That's the idea. This is what the payoff is. This is what you're if you buy this thing, that's what you're gonna get. You're gonna be able to make maximum money in minimum time. One more, trafficsecrets.com. This is another good ClickFunnels, Russell Brunson funnel. Want the secret to unlimited traffic to your website or funnel? Claim a free copy of the Underground Traffic Playbook to get hundreds or even thousands of hungry buyers to your websites and funnels, right? So this together, and again, it's a skill, right? It's not just like, oh, here it is. Now you can do it too. I mean, it takes years of digging around in some of this stuff. But the idea is that those things together are an angle and a payoff, and that creates your hook. And that's the most important part. And a lot of times, by the way, um, the cool thing about this kind of marketing is it's not like you create this, spend thousands of dollars, and hope to God you were right.
Mm.
Literally, when you start putting something out there and you start driving traffic to it, either through free content or paid content, advertising or whatever, when you start doing that, you should pretty much immediately be running a test of two different versions. The internet is awesome. We have tools now built into many of our websites and things, where we can very easily do that. So 50% of visitors, we can show digital business expert reveals how to build a six-figure website business, yada yada yada. At the same time, to the other 50%, we can show, want to learn how to build a six-figure business? Click below, or something
Mhm.
a lot simpler, or whatever. We can even test two entirely different versions of the page, first, and then say, well, which design of the page, which version of the page gets the best. It's actually called scientific advertising, because you determine, just like in scientific testing, you determine a control. And once you get a winner from that first group, then you have a new control, and then you begin the next test to
Yeah.
test the next thing. And so it's really cool because you don't have to be right the first time. You won't be. I mean, it might take 4, 5, 6, 10, 20 times before you get it right. And spending little bits of money or little bits of time to drive content and traffic to figure out what works.
Hmm.
Um, so that's the most important is to write the hook, the starting hook, and then testing from there. Identify the script. So usually, again, some form of problem, agitate, solve, or the before after bridge, or the great big promise, or the AIDA, and there's other ones that I could mention as well. Um, Again, not reinventing the wheel. You should never go to a blanking cursor on a sales letter having just no idea what you're going to write. I mean, obviously, you're not going to write it until you write it. I mean, that seems obvious, but you're going to at least have an idea of, okay, this is the script that I'm going to write. This is the framework of writing that I'm going to take that's going to support the hook that I've come up with. Uh, then you just start writing. That's step 3. I mean, easy enough, right? Start writing and
Just like
figure out. Yeah, exactly. Just like that. Um, and then, the outline in this case, this is my 4th and final point on this. The outline just sort of comes along for the ride and happens, naturally. And what you'll end up doing is, so I'm gonna share my screen, just one more time. And for those who get to watch and for nobody else's benefit, for Alex's. But as you scroll down here, you can see these little like, a lot of times, like this headline right here, like, he didn't, like, think, "Oh, okay, headline number 2, if you build it, they will come." Like, at no point was that the thought. It's just, "Oh, this sort of, like, arose naturally out of the text." And some of this is just like, yeah, this doesn't necessarily headline what's below it, rather it draws attention. So a lot of times you're not even gonna have a traditional outline here. The point is to break up the text, to break up the patterns, and it even creates what's called a secondary reading pattern. So, like, you can't always do this, but a lot of times, if you just read like the emphasized text, you actually get it's called the secondary reading pattern. You get a second story
hmm,
embedded within the first story, so that the people who skim get the idea as well. Uh,
interesting.
yeah, so that's just some of the ideas, but honestly, like, again, marketing, sales, direct response, copywriting is writing a hook, identifying a script, and then start writing. I mean, that is honestly what it boils down to. It just takes a lot of time and study and practice to just be able to, like, pull concepts out of thin air, like I'm doing now, just sort of talking
Yeah.
about it and, you know, so you another thing you'll do as you're studying and researching for this is you create what are called swipe files, which is basically just keeping a data bank either physically or mentally or whatever or both of funnels and things that you've seen before, and go back and just modeling some of what other people have done and seeing if it works for you. You don't copy anything verbatim
Right.
because that would be stealing, but you model the success that other people have had and then put it into practice for yourself, and that's it. So
Cool.
yeah, 100%. Um,
Again,
if you don't have any questions.
learning a lot. No, because I'm definitely someone who asks questions along the way. Like for instance, at meetings at work when we're supposed to, it's a round table. I don't like round tables because if I have an issue to take care of, I'll go to
Mhm.
you directly. And so that's kind of
Right,
how
I
this
see. Yeah,
go.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. No, that's awesome. Awesome. Cool, cool. Well, good. I'm excited to get back into some fiction stuff. So
Yeah, cool. So the first couple things that I talked about while starting my book, and one of the I guess things to know about the world building too, like say if you're writing a 3 book series or in other cases a 10 book series or a 14 book series, of course you're going to be world building throughout most of it, but a lot of the world building happens initially. So if you're writing like book 2 of a book, you don't actually have to do all the world building that you did for the first one. But just a little note that I thought of. But so I start with world building and the overall conflict that's happening in the world and during the setting where the characters are going to be. Then this is the point where I finally make my characters. Um, I don't really have a process. It's kind of interesting. I actually don't really sit down and think, what characters am I going to do? I basically picture a setting, whether it's a city or a town, or I kind of have an overall goal too of how I want the world to advance and how I want the general conflict to shift. And so I just kind of I play with ideas of just very generally of what kind of people that I picture in the world, and a lot to obviously make them interesting. I'm not, you know, usually I have someone who might have some type of gift with the magic system, other person who doesn't, maybe someone who really wants to but can't, someone who has no idea. Um, so I mean, writing your characters as long as they're interesting, that they make sense, they have good motivations. Um, some notes that I have here on characters is um, you just need to make them believable. What interests do they have? Even if you're not necessarily writing specifically about this one hobby that they have, what does that hobby say about them? How would they perceive a certain situation? So there's that. And then also a really big thing, which really goes into my next step and probably the most important, especially starting out, is their motivation and goals. So let's say my motivation is become the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. That is my motivation. And let's just say I go through an avenue of through some type of banking company. And then all of a sudden, I don't know, something happens where all the banks shut down. The currency in the USA goes crazy, everything goes whack. Now, I still want that
Wait,
goal.
is this prophecy or fiction?
I don't want to say, I don't want to say who told me this, but um, so if I still had the motivation of wanting to become a CEO, but all my experiences in the banking, obviously that can transfer over, but there's a new conflict. What other company am I going to go into? So those goals and motivations are going to shape the decisions that I make and how I handle conflict and all of that. So it's very important to know where your characters are. They happy with their life? Do they want to change? Do where are they now and where do they want to be? Um, I guess there's room for you can have a lazy character, but you still have to kind of put him towards stuff so he change. Characters have to change through a book, I think. Again, I hate saying always or never, but characters need to change and develop and overcome and achieve their goals, or at least seek to achieve their goals and maybe fall short of it. This goes into the next portion. It's
Well, okay, question here then,
yeah, go
I
for it.
if I can. So, I'm kinda okay, so it made a lot of sense to me that we have this conflict. Um, I mentioned the 24 thing, how it seemed like they could, like, keep working backwards and create,
Mhm.
like, new angles of conflict. Are you doing that before you get to characters, or are you only outlining the main conflict?
If I know
The
you're
reason
asking.
the reason I'm asking is because it still seems hard for me to think if I'm thinking about myself, "Okay, I'm gonna try to write a fiction book." I now have this scenario in which the world's gonna end or whatever, like, I guess that feels so macro to me, and then characters feel so micro to me for some reason. Maybe I'm not thinking correctly about characters, but I feel like how do you get from the world's gonna end to like, Jane in the coffee shop? Um, like it feels like a really big jump to me. So like are you saying, okay, here's this main conflict, and then here's another lesser conflict that supports that conflict, and then here's another one, and then doing characters,
Mm.
or do you jump straight from the main conflict into characters? I guess main characters? That's what you do, yeah?
Straight from the main conflict into characters, and I'll kinda get into how that works and how to make it easier.
Okay, alright, cool.
When I talk about actually writing, and it's a very, I mean, everyone does it, it's just you don't when you think about it, though, it makes sense. So I'll definitely talk about
Okay,
that, but, one thing I will say is that that helps is a lot of times, again, that big overarching main conflict, especially because I look at the epic fantasy side of things, that reader is gonna slowly understand and see that big conflict unfold over the length of the book, a series of books, and so you don't have to think and worry about the main conflict and okay, it's the start, here's the characters, and here's the main conflict. It's usually not like that. But I think I'll be able to answer your question a little bit on how to make that
okay.
transition from looking out over it and looking at it as like a omniscient being almost and seeing all the puzzle pieces versus okay, now here's this character and what do they matter. So I will
Okay, fantastic.
yeah, I'll make that switch for you. But the one thing that does help to start is to put yourself in the shoes of that character and to formulate their motivations and make them that real character. And now, so after I think of my characters, and generally speaking, how I want them to be is, I now I go into outlining and how my camera's a little weirder. I'm trying to fix that. How I outline is I will start from the very end of the book. So I start with how like the last chapter and how I want the book to end. Um I think about because now I've already set up the motivation for my characters. At this point, too, um, typically by the end of the book, the either the main if it's a one book thing, if it's just a novel, then the main conflict of the whole world will hopefully be resolved at the ending here. And then also, but if it's a series of books, usually you introduce it somehow. But I think of the end of the book. Okay, here are my characters. Where are they going to be? What is the big thing that happens at the end? Is it going to change the world? Where are they going to? Where's their position going to be in the world once this is over? Are their relationships together going to change? It takes. I actually write quite a bit. It's a very detailed. I don't write like, oh, here's the last chapter, or I don't write chapter 28, 29, 30. I just write, here's the ending and here's where everything, here's like, I guess the setting for the second book. Here's where everything ends. After that, I work backwards a little bit. So I have to kind of know, I don't really think about twist how to get to the end. I work my way backwards to say, okay, if here's step 10, the king gets beheaded by the main character. The evil king gets beheaded by the main character. Okay, let's take a step back. How the heck did this guy get in the castle with all the guards surrounding him? Okay, so now I have to think about how he got into the castle. And then, so I take a step back and then I kind of reach up to that moment where he kills the king. And then I outline slightly before that. Okay, so he made it to the castle. What made him think that he could get into the castle? Did he receive a special power beforehand? Did he receive a prophecy from some wizard? And so you just kind of work your way backwards. And that kind of works in tandem, usually, especially with, again, epic fantasy, with the magic of the world. And, hopefully either your character is involved with the world somehow and is either influenced by magic or knows someone who is part of that system. So that's kind of how I outline backwards, but I only do it to a certain point. I'll outline backwards maybe about 25% of the way. So outline the last quarter of the book, and then I'll start from the beginning. And I know it's kind of jumping back and forth, but now that I have a picture of the end, I can say, okay, now that I know how the book ends, I can kind of get a good feel for where I want my characters to start and how their journey begins. And usually, um, so typically, characters won't do anything different in their life unless there's an external force put upon them. So my personal method of doing it, and it's probably just pretty common elsewhere, like for instance, Lord of the Rings. Frodo gets pushed to take the ring to Rivendell because he has the ring and he's the only one who can do it. So he's literally pushed to do it. He has to do it, or else
Yeah.
he cried like a baby and threw it to the side. It's kind of the same thing for me. Frodo didn't intend to destroy the ring at Mount Doom at first. His intention was to bring it. In fact, wasn't even bring it to Rivendell at first. It was to meet Gandalf at Bree, which was a lot closer. I guess probably half the distance, give or take. So, and but his journey ended up being longer. It's the same thing with this. So you have to have a push from the world, an external a force that says, "Okay, character, here's where we're going to push," and that's where the character motivations come in too. So, for instance, Bilbo Baggins wasn't someone who liked adventure, at least so he thought. And it turned out that Bilbo really liked adventures. And so if you try to push one of your characters, especially a gentle nudge into one direction, and they're just not motivated at all to do it, or their goals aren't towards there's no interest, there's nothing there, they're not going to do it. And so, and that's why I outline. That's why that's a perfect example why it exhausted me when I tried to be a gardener and just write and see what happens. Cause all of these things I would think about, I write a couple chapters and I think, well, why would this
Mhm.
character do that? Or what would happen if this happened? And I got so burnt out. So that's why I outline very rigorously.
So I like that. Can you give me the one? I think I understand most of that. The one question that's coming to my mind is, you may not even be able to answer this because I'm sure it's different for everything. Like, do you have a sense for how long it takes you in the real world to write the ending? Like, is this something that, okay, I'm going to start writing my first novel or whatever, right? Like, should I expect after a week of doing this for a couple hours a day that I should have my ending, or like, does this normally take you months, or I don't know what you would call yourself in terms of like your experience level with this stuff, and it's probably not fair for me to ask you to judge that, but just like, how long does it take you to write to outline your ending? To really get a sense for where the story is going. How long does that typically take you, if you have an idea?
The ending for me is very quick to write, and I can usually think of,
Really?
at least in my opinion, a pretty interesting and satisfying ending quickly. The thing that takes the longest is point A to point B, getting from the beginning to the end. Simply
But
because
is it wait? But wait, is this because you've already spent hours in mulling over it, or like when you're going to sleep at night, or like, I mean, do you already have a lot of this thought out before you sit down to write, like we were talking about earlier?
I would say so,
Or
yeah. I would say
yeah,
for let's just say it takes me let's just say it takes me 5 hours to sit down, 5 really, diligent hours and grind out just outlining the ending of the book. Shouldn't take longer than that, at least for me. Let's say it takes 5 hours. For every hour I spent writing the ending for the outline for the ending of the book, I probably have spent a few hours thinking about it.
fair enough.
Just
Yeah,
generally, maybe
okay,
not specifically hard thinking, but just
sure, sure.
generally of, because then you're thinking of everything in tandem, the characters. And then once I start thinking about the characters and what they can do, I think, well, wait a second, if they could do that, then that would just ruin my magic system because then this could happen. And so there's a lot of thinking. Now, granted, again, this is really specifically geared towards fantasy because of the magic system. And when you have that on the side, there's a lot you have to think about making sense, about being too powerful, about what breaks the magic system. And so there's a lot, like, for instance, I'm kind of at a point in my book where I know what I want the magic to do to the characters and have them be able to do, but I want to make sure that in doing so, it won't affect things down the road for me and, either create a situation where something doesn't make sense, or people will say, "Oh, well, this happened in the first book, so why don't you just do that?" Yeah, I want to make sure that everything is in line. So the
No,
outlining,
I'm gonna ask a dumb and maybe irrelevant question. The Force in Star Wars, is that
yeah,
a magic system in the sense that you're using the term, or
yeah, I'd say so. Yeah,
okay,
yep, yep. The Force, I would say that's definitely the magic system there.
okay,
And then the
um,
Lord of the Rings doesn't have Lord of the Lord of the Rings doesn't have much of a magic system. It does. There is magic in there. Let me say that. It's just not manifested and used as much as in like other books and other
right, it's not,
movies.
yeah, it doesn't really seem to be like a specific framework for how they interact with the world.
Yeah.
It's more of just like, oh, yeah, there's these little things that different types of beings can
Yeah.
do, but it's not like a controlling
Yeah.
force.
And it's taken longer for me too, because I am trying to think of something that nothing is wholly original, but trying to think of something that's quite original. And I think I have a pretty good idea for something. And so I'm just trying to really put the pieces together and how to make that work. It's going well, but like at the beginning where the conflict really starts, because I think in the first couple chapters, you
Mhm,
should really get those characters going and say, okay, like,
right.
all right, let's push them out the door. Here's where they're going. Here's where they're off to. And so I'm really looking at chapters 1 and 2, and I know the scene, I see it happening, and I just need to know specifically. We're talking a little bit earlier before this podcast about demonic possession. Is it
Yeah.
really demonic possession? Is it someone that has a mental illness and they need, medicine to seek help, or a psychologist, or are they faking it? So like I guess to kind of use that in a way where there's this thing happening at the beginning of my book, and how exactly do I want it to affect my characters?
Yeah.
Because there's just be repercussions down the road depending on how I want to go.
Do you, and I don't mean to rabbit trail too much on the magic system thing, but do you tend to follow Brandon Sanderson's, like, rules that he's outlined for that? Have you heard him talk about his rules for magic systems? I've heard him talk
Um,
about.
Yeah, so I've listened to them. I can only tell you like the first one, but the other ones I'm familiar with. So I use that as a guideline. Well, let me put
Yeah,
this. I do think actually they should be followed. I think they're very good rules. But no, I
yeah.
can't like recite them and say,
Oh, yeah, no.
diligently, yeah. But no, I think that they're excellent rules to follow for sure.
Yeah, in general, I mean, yeah, it's probably nothing that you're, like, actively thinking about all day, but, like, as you're creating your magic system, you're maybe like, "Oh, this is starting to bump up against something that
Mhm.
feels unnatural," and then it's like, "Oh, yeah, I think he mentioned this rule or something,"
Gotcha. Yeah.
like, the other one that I can really remember is just the fact that, like, it can't make you God, like, the magic system can't make you God because, then anything's possible, right? Like, it can't give you, like, omnipotence, basically.
My
Um
personal flavor, I lean more I like being in the middle of Lord of the Rings and like Brandon Sanderson's books. And not to say that
Mhm.
Brandon Sanderson isn't like there's much more books out there that have more magic than his does, like as far as everyone being able to use it and affected by it. But I like somewhere in the middle. I definitely like the magic to be present and noticeable and usable by one or two of the main characters and side characters. But I also like that realism of, there's people who can't use it or not even know about it. So I kind of like
Yeah.
a middle ground there. Um,
Cool.
so yeah, so that's how I kind of outline. And then my outline is very detailed. I would say maybe 20 to It depends. Yeah, probably at least 20 pages will be a detailed outline of just the book. It's really a mini condensed version of the book, a synopsis, if you will. And then also at the beginning of it, I'm also labeling terms that I want to use. I make personal, even outside the outline, make personal notes just as far as, okay, here's this city, and then here's how this was affected here, and here's how it affected this person. I just make my own personal notes so I know where I'm going
Yeah.
with it.
I'm sure
Uh,
this is, like, very personal to you, but I'm gonna have you actually show me one of these sometime so that I can, like, so that I can actually look at, like, the
Once I'm done fully outlining this book, I have a pretty good chunk of it. I have the ending down, of course, and then a lot of other stuff. I'll send it to you. A lot of it
yeah,
will
it'd be
just
great.
be chicken scratch probably, but I'll
It's
send it
fine,
to you
I'm
so
like
you can see.
that's cool. I'm into seeing the behind the scenes. I wanna see what's going
Absolutely. And then when I'm done
so
with the second draft, probably I'll send it on over your way. Um, Now, and so after the outlining, and I actually kind of write some while I outline. Um, that's when I know the ending, and I'm already
and
out at the very beginning, and I
okay,
only
so
write
so,
very little.
like, give me a sense, sorry to be so nosy, give me a sense for the level of detail in your outline. I mean, well, you asked me the same question, but it's like, you know, Jane goes to coffee shop on Saturday morning. I mean, is that too detailed? At that point, is that just writing the book? Or I
So
don't know,
let me put
yeah,
it
make
this
some
way.
go
I
ahead,
will
yeah.
not when I outline, I don't do prose. I don't say I will not say Steve Schramm walked into the bookstore and noticed the shadowy figure in the corner. I don't relate that. I would say, chapter 2 or whatever. Steve's at the bookstore. He notices this guy in the corner, definitely very sketchy. And sometimes you as
Mm,
Steve do not know, you can see that he's sketchy, but you don't know his presence is there. But me as the author, I'll put a note. Obviously, like this guy is sketchy because he's from here, and that's why he's wearing this. And then I'll go on again with editing. I mean, with kind of outlining. So that'll be a personal note for me. So the outline is very much of giving me notes and also outlining what I want to happen. The main thing that cover is obviously there's description of the chapters, there's like playful banter between characters. So like what I'll do is I'll say, okay, in this scene, here's where it starts. Um, Here's where I want the chapter to end. Here's what needs to happen in this chapter. So how do I get there? What are some big points? And then after I get that done, at the end, I'll make notes like, okay, this character's in the scene. Let's just say, Steve, you're the main character. I'll say, um, I actually kind of, yeah, I'll show you pretty soon kind of how I outline it, but I'll say, Steve, um, how did his motivations get solved? Is there anything, like what character development did he have with the other characters? And then I'll say, you know what, this is a really good time for him to connect with this other character, Alex. They have kind of similar mindsets on stuff, but I could see where they'd have disagreements. So let's get them talking a little bit. And I'll like make notes like that. And then when I'm actually writing is when I do my prose and I'll look at my notes. I'll think, yeah, I'll try to figure a situation. Maybe Alex will tell an off color joke and Steve will kind of find it funny and wonder why he thought of that because it relates to this. And then I'll write about it. So that's kind of how I do it. Um,
Cool. Yeah.
so the writing, I definitely don't outline, okay, this paragraph, write this, you're going to write this or write this, write this. It's mostly here's what's going to happen, here's where it needs to go, and what's the character development in each of those chapters. That's the biggest thing that happens.
Cool. Okay. Yeah, that helps.
Um, and then yeah, so just kind of going into the obviously the next thing is writing. I s- I say this because I've heard of people writing differently. It makes sense for nonfiction. It doesn't for fiction, but some people do write this way for fiction. Some people do not write chronologically for fiction. They'll write like the couple beginning chapters and then they'll say, "Oh, I really want to write like this big scene happening here." And they'll do that. I actually do see I'll get into that in a moment. I have to write chronologically. Um, I outline backwards so that I know the ending, but I have to write chronologically or else I get confused with the time jumps. And then if I write chronologically in this place, but then as I'm writing, if I want to change some stuff, I don't know. It just seems very out of line to me. It just doesn't work with how I think. So I write chronologically.
Yeah, I think I
Um,
have to do that too. For sure.
yes, yes. And this is where so this is where I hope to answer your question, Steve, on um looking at the overall epicness of this big conflict and all the clouds, clashing and the gods are mad at each other too. Okay, here's these people. Um Most people write in third person limited. It's not like a big secret, but that's how I write, and it really just puts the focus on the character. So third person limited, Steve, you're the main character in my story. You're in the coffee shop. I am writing as you and what you see. So if you go into the coffee shop and the shadowy guy at the table has a knife, you don't know he has a knife. So me as the author, I cannot tell the reader that that guy has a knife. You, Steve, walk in and you see that the guy's a little sketchy. You've kind of have been mugged before, so you want to try to sit at the end of the table. And so I describe your behaviors, what you're thinking, and what you know. But my knowledge that I share to the reader is very much limited to who you are and what you know. So that kind of helps bridge the gap of you're not worried about what's going up in the sky. You don't even know what's going on up there. Who cares about what gods are fighting? You don't even know if they exist or when they existed. All you care about is, oh my gosh, there's a shadowy guy at the end of the table, but I really need to be here. I hope he doesn't stab me. And that just really quickly sucks you into character development and writing that character and focusing on that perspective. And I like to have 2 or 3 main characters. And so very important that when you do switch characters that there's that noticeable shift in how they think. Even your writing style is going to be the same. Like some authors are really good and some have really done like where they'll shift their whole writing style depending on the perspective. That's really hard to do. It takes a lot of practice. I'm definitely not there yet. I don't know if I ever will be or want to do that. But at least how the character thinks and the decisions that they make and how they talk definitely needs to be a noticeable shift when you're switching character point of views there. Um so
Okay. So, all right. So two things. So you wrote down here, again, and you talked about this characters, but you say characters, characters, characters. Stick to the characters, right? This is
yeah.
what you have wrote. So I was going to say, like, can you elaborate on that a little? Like, what were you thinking when you wrote that? Like, are you thinking like the point of the story is the characters? So like, don't get too lost in the weeds of the world or the whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
Stay with the character development. Is that what you're trying to get at there?
Exactly. So in Dune, obviously you want to know how the government unfolds and how the freemen are they gonna, end up overtaking the planet, but their rightful homeland or what's gonna happen. You obviously want to know that stuff. But if you just describe it like a historical thing and say what's gonna happen and there's no main character, then there's no personal investment in it.
There's no
So
story.
is there a story? There's literally no story. So I say characters, characters, characters because literally that's the only thing that matters. Obviously, you have to have a good setting. Obviously, you have to have a good story, but there's no story without characters. There's no purpose. There's no so yeah, so that's why you focus on the characters and the character development, making them real. their relationships with it, just everything to do with making a character a real human.
Well, and it's like, Star Wars example is an easy one. It's like Luke Skywalker blowing up the Death Star is fairly interesting, but it's only one layer of problem, like we've talked about
Exactly.
before with the
Yeah.
different layers of problems. It's far more interesting that Luke became somebody as a result of
Mhm.
doing that based on the person that he was. And also that he defeated that philosophical issue of good versus evil in that particular story, right? So yeah, developing the characters sort of leads to that. Um, and then the other thing is you do mention here in our notes about first person being very popular. Now, you
Yes.
mentioned Twilight as an example. Now, believe it or not, actually, and I'm going to lose a main card for this, but I actually really like the Twilight movies. I thought they
Mhm.
were fairly decent. It's been a while since I've seen them, but I actually thought they were pretty decent. I've never read the books. So like, how are the books written? Like, so first
First
person.
person. Yeah.
Can you give me can you give me like an idea? I mean, I know what first person is, but can you give me an
Yeah.
actual example?
Yeah, so instead of saying, Bella Swan saw I'm a semi Twilight fan. I read the books and it was a big thing when I was in high school. So I'm very much
Yeah,
on your side with that. So yeah,
cool.
Bella Swan saw Edward Cullen and she hoped that he would notice her. Instead it's I actually I would never write in first person because one, I think it's so difficult to do. I just wouldn't know what to
Yeah.
start. So this is gonna be a poor example, but um like, he looked at me and, his when his eyes saw me, I just started to tingle and I couldn't bear it, so I looked away. So it's very much you are that
You
person.
like, you are the character, yeah.
There is one of the guys that does
Interesting.
the writing excuses of Brandon Sanderson. I'm sorry, I can't think of his name. I think the name of the book is I think it's just called Serial Killer, or I'm a Serial Killer, where it's a first person and he's a teenage boy, I think, and he's a serial killer. And
Mhm.
it's I haven't read it. I really want to because apparently it's very well done. With just the mind of working and stuff. But again, it's very popular in young adults. Not sure why. I'm sure there's a reason for that, but it's just very common in young adult fantasy. And I think I never read them, but I think the Hunger Games were written in first person. I think maybe not though, but it's just very common for this to be written that way. But the last point that I have is I put in all caps envision scenes. Um, Even though reading is just reading, it's really just one medium of storytelling. I'm very much a music person and very much a visual person. I like playing video games. I like listening to music. Even though I can't play an instrument, I just never really tried learning. I love music. And so when I am thinking about it helps me think about the ending of the book, climactic scenes, really serious scenes. Um, I always have listened to like a song or a couple songs that will get me in the mood to think of a scene that I want to write. And so when I think of a scene, I think about it while I listen to music and while I think about like visually how it would be, almost like thematically, like if a movie were to be made about it. So I really thinking about those
Yeah.
big scenes get you excited so that even when you're going through the quote unquote boring parts where you're developing the character and kind of having the characters interact, nothing really is exciting going on. Obviously, it can still be good and interesting, but those parts where it's, oh my gosh, here's this huge battle, and this person probably will die because they said they would sacrifice themselves for this. Is that really going to happen? And then in those moments, I think about like, just a song to help me get into the emotional state of what the characters are feeling and what's going to
Yeah.
happen. So,
Interesting, interesting. I think that would be very helpful for me to help visualize things. I have one last question for you,
yeah.
I think, and, it's gonna be another one where I hope I, like, can actually get the question across. Um, but, like, I thought this concept of do you know what I mean if I say, like, the messy middle? Does that
Like,
sound
of the
about
book.
Oh, well, just, no, not necessarily of a book, but just, in doing anything, right? So there's a period of, like, especially for a lot of creatives, right? There's a period of, like, excitement, new thing, okay? And then, like, as something is coming to a close, it's kinda gets, like, exciting again because it's, like,
Mhm.
time to
Yeah.
launch it. We start talking about it and, like, finishing it up and getting it out there. But then there's this messy middle of stuff that has to get done. So the first version of the question that I was gonna ask you is, what's your favorite part of the writing process? I would like to know that. but I would also like to know, like, how do you get through like the boring, what are the boring parts? How do you get through them? I mean, I know my attention span, right? And I know what kind of person I am. The kind of person I am is I like to start new things, but finishing things is not always my favorite. So, like in my business, I have a team of people who help me with
Mhm.
finishing things because I'm a starter. And so obviously, in order to stay in business, I also have to be a finisher. And so I have people
Right.
who now help me with that. But when you're writing, you don't really have that, right? It's all about what you can produce, right?
Yeah.
And so how does that, I mean, maybe you just enjoy everything and that's probably fine. And maybe, writing for the sake of writing, but just do you have any thoughts about those things?
Yeah, so my favorite part of the writing process is since I do now realize that I am very much an architect, I really enjoy um figuring out the details and how everything connects, how the character connects, where the story goes, how the magic system comes in, and then also thinking in my mind other books that I want to write that's in the world and how that might connect. I love just thinking about that. Not even, I guess that's a little bit of world building, but really specifically thinking about how I want this story to go in light of all those other
Mm,
things. And then thinking
yeah,
of the ending. Because once I know how the characters are going to end and the big payoff at the end, that gets me excited because I know if I get there, it's going to be really worth it. As far
gotcha.
as writing, getting after the beginning, which was exciting, and then figuring out the ending, which is exciting, the middle parts, there's two different things that you can do to really keep up the motivation. Well, I guess first of all, your book should be good no matter what. Even the slower parts should be interesting and want to keep you reading. So having said that, when you're going through a couple chapters where it's putting in the pieces together to get set up for the big part coming up, one thing that you can do is just keep your eyes focused on that big part. If it's not too much of a lull, if it's like two, three, maybe four chapters before you get to a big part, just keep your eyes focused on that. And maybe again, I can't do this, but what's kind of recommended sometimes is go ahead and jump ahead and write that part if you want, or write part of it and go get excited about it, and then go back and keep going. The
Yeah.
second thing is it's your book. Think of something interesting to put in there. So your guys are sitting at a tavern and all of a sudden like a fire breaks out. Obviously, you can't just be super random with it. It has to fit into the world somehow, but
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
have something interesting happen. Um, why not? It doesn't have to be outrageously, out there. Like, say if it's a magic system that you're dealing with that has certain powers, okay, and the main character's trying to figure out, and all of a sudden, like one of the characters like falls and like breaks their arm or something. Like that's random and sudden. Then one of the characters finds out that wow, like he can heal them, and then all of a sudden, in the
Oh,
kind of the
yeah,
boring
cool.
part where the characters are talking, trying to figure this out, you're like, holy crap, like this character can heal apparently. So, and then you and then you get the
Oh, yeah.
and then you get the
So
reader
cool.
then you get the reader thinking like, wow, like if he could heal, then that means that like maybe his mother who's been ill. I wonder if he can heal a disease and not just a broken bone. Like,
Oh,
so
yeah.
you can just add, and that's where my mind goes, where when I'm trying to think about exciting stuff to put in, how it relates to magic, and you just
Man.
go with it. And that's how you stumble upon the aha moments when you think of something like that, like the falling and breaking the arm, but then you're like, oh wow, if I put that in there, then that just changes the whole game and it
Oh,
fits
that's so cool.
perfectly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's just kind of how,
Love that.
yeah. But that's all I have.
Okay, one last question on that. Do you
Yeah.
find okay, when stuff like that happens, because it
Yeah.
obviously does, do you find yourself having to go back and rewrite other things to make things make sense with that, or does that not happen often?
Typically the aha moments happen during my outlining and when I'm thinking about it. But
Oh, gotcha, okay.
if it happens when I'm writing, you just keep writing and then you make a note of it. And then when you edit, you just go back and change it. So
Fair enough, yeah.
yeah, you just keep writing. And even if it changes some stuff in the beginning, because I'm not a gardener, I can't go back and edit or else I'll get frustrated and burnt out. So I just got to keep
Sure.
writing.
Cool, very good.
So anyway,
Um,
that was fun.
yeah, absolutely, that was okay, wait, I have one more question, I can't help it.
That's
We're trying to
provided
wrap
I,
up. But, okay, like, I go back and maybe it's just because I like to read what I write, I don't know, which sounds really absorbed, but, like, you say you're not a gardener, right, you're a writer, like, how often do you go back and just, like, read what you wrote? Like, for logic and just consistency, like, do you ever do that? Or do you just keep on trucking or
I would say,
um,
like, a normal amount.
okay,
Like,
fair enough.
it's
Okay.
mostly because
Yeah,
I stumble upon it, like, I'll, like, look through my folders and be like, "Oh, here's this that I wrote," and then I'll read it, I'm like, "Oh, that was interesting," and then I
fair
never
enough.
purposely sit down to read anything I write, if that makes
No, I
sense.
just mean, like,
Yeah.
as you're
Oh,
writing it, like
as I'm wri oh,
yeah,
as
as
I'm
you're
writing.
writing it, it's like,
Yeah.
"Oh,
So,
I wrote,
I
4
gotcha, I got
paragraphs," and then you go back and, like, read what you just wrote and say,
so, the next writing session that I do, yeah, I'll, like, go back, like, 3 pages, or sometimes even the beginning of the chapter and read
kinda
it
get your
just so
head
I have the
into it.
mentality, and I'm like, "Okay,
Yeah,
then I'm good to go."
I
Now,
I do that as well.
I guess another thing that I have to think, even though I do outline my book, um, it's when before my, writing session, which is usually, like, 2 hours long, I have to prep myself for about a good hour. Usually it's when I'm, like, driving just because it's a good time to think, and at that point, I can't sit down and write without having to think about what I'm going to write, if that makes sense.
Sure,
I
yeah.
have to beforehand think, "Okay, my characters are here. I'm specifically" this is really getting into detail though, like, I will think, "Okay, specifically, I want this character to say this to that person. When they're walking through this village, I really want him to notice that because that's the kind of person he is." And that's when I really that way when I sit down, I know, okay, I know what I'm gonna write. And then of
Oh,
course and then that's where I do let it flow because I already have it in my mind. And if something comes up that I think about, then I'll kind of venture towards it a little bit. And so there's obviously a little bit of guarding that's kind of done along the way, but it's mostly planned out.
yeah, very good. Cool, awesome, man.
I'm excited to kind of show you what I have, and I'm excited for you to get into writing some fiction, Steve.
I can't wait. I can't wait to see what you have, and,
Yeah,
I
as soon
think
as I'm
I'm
done
gonna have to
my outlining, I'll send it over to you.
I'm gonna have to meditate a little on the conflict thing. I think that really opened up a world of understanding for me that, like, is really obvious, like, it's there, but it's, it's I don't know, it's just something I hadn't thought about before where it's like, "Oh, yeah, this is an obvious place to start."
Yeah,
I think just starting is what has scared me to this point, like, what does it look like to start this? And I think that is a good place, so,
and try different
um
things too.
so should we do story of the week,
What's
real
the
quick?
story of the week?
And we'll round it out probably right around 2 hours. So maybe hopefully
Which
this
is
won't become a new norm of 2 hours every time, but I mean, and for our listeners' sake,
this was fun
but
though.
I'm enjoying
Hey,
the heck out of it though.
people
So,
can listen to us at 1.5 speed, 2 speed. They can skip over you, skip over me. They can, do whatever
100%,
you want,
100%,
or just not even
100%.
choose to listen to us.
Well, that would be unfortunate because they're I mean, I hope somebody does because we're talking about some really awesome stuff here. So,
So, yeah.
it's so exciting.
Story of the
I'll
week.
I'll go first. I have I have I have 3, but 2 of them are kind of the same one. So just super quick. No, just the first one is just mad respect. Taylor Hawkins, Foo Fighters drummer, he died this week. And that is really sad. I think you might have said it was or overdose related, maybe. He was had heart pain, chest pain. They were on tour, and he died. And that really sucks because Taylor Hawkins was an awesome drummer, and Foo Fighters are an awesome band.
Yeah,
So just, I guess, more than anything, paying respect to him. I'm a drummer, and he's just always been a huge influence on my drumming, and so
yeah,
that sucks. You know,
yeah. Yeah, it sucks.
just sucks. The other, so the really interesting story is, so again, without going all into it, the Daily Wire is just a really interesting. It kind of started as a news outlet, but now they're actually becoming more of like an entertainment company. And
Yeah,
so, familiar with Jeremy Boring or Ben Shapiro, these guys. They are part of this, and what's interesting is they are really trying to help create an alternative for those of us like me who don't necessarily buy into the wokeness and the political left stuff. Like, if you're into that kind of stuff, okay, very great, cool. But I'm not, and neither are these guys. And what's really interesting is the story here is just watching them step up to the plate. Actually, I decided to become a subscriber today. Well, I say today, it was technically yesterday as we recorded this, but on
yeah,
Thursday, I decided to become a subscriber because I believe in what they're doing, and they're really trying to create some awesome content with just good, not like overtly like Christian or Jewish or anything like that in your face, but more so just wholesome conservative content that you'd be good to let your kids watch. And so I bought. You can get right now. You can get 45% off of your first year with a subscription code. I think it's two you can use. I think one's Build the Future. The other one is Fight Woke Disney, I think. So they just did this announcement um, of this recording of Disney executives where they basically talked about a specific agenda that their content was going to start really hard, intentionally pushing for children. And some of us on the conservative side aren't very happy about that. So the Daily Wire has committed to spending $150 million over the next 3 years on kids content alone. And so I'm not even going to watch probably most of what's on there, but I support what they're doing in that regard, and I want to be a small part of helping to support it for the long term. So I did decide to do that. And in a corollary to that, like literally last week, or it might have even been this. No, I think it was last week.
Yeah.
They launched a video for Jeremy's Razors, which is basically like a Harry's alternative, basically Harry's razors. In it for better, lack of a better term, they basically canceled the Daily Wire, and or they had problems, and there was a conflict there of some sort. And so Daily Wire's response was to basically create a whole company called Jeremy's Razors. They have you seen the video for this?
Yeah, and
The
yeah, and there's
Did you watch it? You did? You saw it?
yep,
I w- is it is
it's good.
it is quite possibly the most epic sales video I've ever seen in my life. And I say that not because it's overtly salesy, although it is in some ways, but it's just kind of like if you identify like at all with that worldview, like you're probably about to be buying some Rangers. Like I haven't yet, and I'm kind of surprised. Only because I am happy and I am a happily subscribed Dollar Shave Club individual and have been for a very
Right?
long time. But I don't know, I could maybe see changing. And anyway, so since they launched that last week, they had 45,000 subscribers.
Yeah,
Which is like
crazy.
huge. And what's
35,000.
45,000. And what's interesting is it's like they made the point that, you could do this with almost anything because people, especially conservatives, I mean, it's just like, frankly, it's time to speak out. It's time to not just like, be on the sidelines or whatever. And you could do this with almost any product. And that's like, yeah, they're like, yeah, that's the plan. Right. So look for more stuff coming. But I found some of those things interesting. And so I took on a Daily Wire subscription because, hey, they're taking on Disney, and Disney spent $25 billion on content alone in 2021, $33 billion, I think is the plan for 2022. And, these guys are like, yeah, let's bring it on. Let's do it. And I think there's something really cool and
Yeah.
courageous about that. And I stand behind it. So
Well, Steve, you cheated twice because you got 3 stories, but I only have 1. But it's a
I'm
good
so sorry.
everyone's talking about it, and we're gonna talk about it, and that's,
Let's do it.
Will Smith beating down on Chris Rock.
Man. The Fresh Prince.
One
Man,
of
he put the smackdown on him.
one of the weirdest things I've ever seen, and I didn't watch it live, I just saw, like, Will Smith
Yeah,
punch Chris
replay.
Rock, and
Yeah.
I didn't know if it was real or not, and as soon as I watched, I was like, "Oh, like, that's legit, that he really
Mhm.
punched him," and I don't even know what to say. I have a lot of stuff to say about it, but it just blew my mind. I just there's someone to
Mhm.
get up and approach him, and someone who's just standing there, and just from the simple fact of you're just punching someone who doesn't know what's coming, and
Right.
and Chris just took it like a champ, and well,
Yeah.
obviously he was stunned, but then didn't come
Yeah.
back out at him or anything. But
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't
I
know.
I
I don't
gotta
know. What did
say,
you think when you saw it?
I got it. I've actually had a lot of different reactions. In some ways, I've changed my opinion. In some ways, not. I think I guess the weirdest thing about it to me, and the thing where that maybe like question my initial reaction. I mean, my first initial like I guess man reaction was, yeah, go freaking like you got it, man. Like stand up for your wife, like whatever. Okay. And then immediately after that came my Christian conviction of Jesus says, bless your enemies, do good to those that hate you, pray for those who curse you, things like this. And so I was like, okay, well, I definitely don't think Jesus would have necessarily walked up and slapped the guy across the face. So let's start there. As a Christian, I sort of, am committed to a worldview that oftentimes, bucks up against what I want to do in my fleshly reaction, right? So there was that. But then I was my opinion changed even a little bit further in that direction when I started reading a lot of what other people were saying about how there were a lot of really good arguments about the fact that, look, he was a comedian, number one, which is obvious, but it's a factor. Number two, he didn't actually know that there was a problem going on there, right? And so it was like the GI Jane joke was actually like contextually, like it made sense, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't like you talk about in your stories a lot. Like it has to make sense for the character. Well, it made sense contextually with the character with the GI Jane. I mean, it made sense. Um, and so and here's the thing that got me the most about the whole scenario is that Will seemed to understand that, right? Because his initial reaction was one of
He
breaking out
thought
in
it was funny.
laughter,
Yeah,
right? He thought
and
it
I
was
think
funny.
it's kind of what everyone's thinking is I think he'd rather have, faced the humiliation on TV for a little bit and rather than
Yeah.
a lifetime of facing
Mhm.
not
Yeah, and there's a meme going around Facebook that's just hilarious. It's got him laughing first, and then it's got, like, this crazy-eyed shot of her where she was starting to have that bad reaction, and it says, like, "Execute Order 66" or whatever, and then
yeah,
the
that's
next one
funny.
the next one is him with the, the mad face, like, "Come at me, bro," and then, before he goes up and smacks
I
the
gotta
crap
s
out of him.
I gotta send you a funny video. I love this for if anything, I love this moment because now we just have unlimited content of funny stuff based off this.
Right? The
But
memes,
the
were
best one I saw, I think it was, like, in 2006, I saw Chris Rock was, like, at the Nickelodeon thing giving out awards, and Will Smith was there. So all the
Yeah.
kids are cheering, and Chris Rock says, "And then my man, Will Smith is here." And then it cuts to Will Smith at the awards, but it's like you see in the crowd with kids, and he says, Take my name out of your mouth." And it's like,
Right?
this thing was perfect because of all the kids there, and it was great.
Uh,
But, yeah, so I've always been where if you're a comedian, if that's what you do, I I just think anything goes. Like, you can say whatever you want. It's your
yeah.
job, it's who you are. Doesn't
There's
mean
whole
just
like those roasting like those roast things,
exactly.
like that's the like, yeah, it's a
And it
genre.
doesn't necessarily mean I find everything funny or that you should say stuff. I've turned a lot of comedians off because I just don't think it's funny or it's too crude and it's just not good. But like, especially if you're a famous person, you're going there and that's his job to do. I'm just like that's just what he does. And you gotta be
Yeah,
ready for it. And so right initially, like in my immediate reaction was like, dude, like that's his job. And it's not like he's making a joke about like her dying or that,
right,
she's like
right.
fumbling with her wig while crying in the mirror. Like he wasn't making fun of her. It was a joke that he tried to say at Jane because she had like what you said, I don't know if he knew or not, but it
Yeah,
sounded like he didn't even know that she was going through that. Um,
yeah.
it
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he
I
didn't know.
I could be wrong, but I think Will Smith is probably a pretty smart guy, just a hunch. And so I
Mm,
I thought that if he really and it would have been funny too, it would have been funny and he would have proved a point. I think between like that time and with him getting his award, he would have plenty of time to think of something, a good comeback to come back with to say to Chris Rock during his acceptance speech or some
yeah,
other time, you know. I just a better way to handle it with words and that. But
yeah.
anyway,
I
it
don't know, it's a weird thing. I mean, I'm interested to see how it plays out with, like I mean, I don't wanna say I'm interested because I'm not, like, totally invested, but, like, they're talking about disciplinary action and, will he be, will the Motion Picture Academy, will they ultimately expel him from that? There's lots of I have lots of thoughts about this. Admittedly, a lot of these thoughts are stemmed from controversial, topics about this company wants to now we're it's like we're looking to Hollywood for our moral authority and
yeah,
everything. And
right.
so it's like the dude kind of misunderstands or in the moment reacts wrongly, in context to a situation and backhands a guy until we're going to kick him out. But like these same people are held up for saying that my little girl should be cool, like sharing a bathroom with little boys. Like, sorry, but I'm just not looking to you for like your moral guidance on my life and like the correct reaction. And so I have some strong feelings about it from that regard. But I'm just kind of interested to see ultimate. I'm not gonna like follow it, but I'm interested to see
Yeah.
ultimately what plays out. Um, with the
Well,
whole
I
scenario.
don't know if this part is true or not. Maybe it's just the Academy trying to cover their rears, but they said that they tried to get Will Smith to leave and he refused.
I did
And
hear
when
that.
I read that, I was thinking like, is that your place or like Will Smith's? Like, He's just
Right.
like, if he went up and assaulted someone on stage,
Right.
like, get security to remove him. And that bugs me both about, not to get into it politically, but both about people and as well as like big corporations and stuff. I'm not against big corporations, just a lot of times you see them get away with so
Sure.
much because of lobbyists and everything. And it's just so frustrating to see. And it's like, dude, like,
Yeah.
I don't
Mhm.
kind of go again, like a rabbit trail, like another thing. And I'm sorry, Steve, if you are one of these people. So maybe I'm calling you, I'm putting you down, but I never got the appeal of having like a preacher or someone sign your Bible.
Oh, yeah.
And
No,
I
I
you're
hate
the same way. Okay, so we you and I are aligned like that. And again, maybe you're those people, all the more power to you. But I remember that was a big thing when I went to PCC.
it was
You know,
huge in where I grew
people,
up.
yeah, people like getting up. I was like, what are they doing? Like, I was just, it did not make sense to me. I was like, why would you have the two
Mhm.
things that came to mind were like, he didn't write the Bible, like he's telling you what's in it. He might be good at telling you what's in it, but then the second thing I had thought of is like, this guy's a man, like he is no better than you.
Yeah.
And I was like,
Yep.
the next, and I can list on my hand, all five fingers probably, people I heard at PCC that really went astray. And I'm like, those people who had him sign his Bible, like, what
Yeah.
was that all for? Anyway, that has
Yeah.
always bothered me.
Preacher celebrity culture is probably a whole separate podcast, but boy, I have people
We
with
should do
this for
that. We
sure.
can relate that to stories, absolutely.
Oh,
Absolutely.
1,000%, and some
Make
people
that
may not
happen
be interested in
sometime.
that, some people may, I mean,
Sometime.
um, it's yeah, yeah, that's a whole other can of worms. I think okay, I think what is fair to say, I think most people at this point, I don't think I've heard anybody from any side of this defend Will's actions at this point. I mean, I
I
think
have
most
either. Yeah.
people agree
Yeah.
that Will was in the wrong given
Yeah.
all of the all of the information. It was not an appropriate thing to do. Even I mean that even from the most manliest man, whatever perspective you want to take, defending your wife or whatever, I think everybody pretty much agrees that he was in the wrong given the context of the situation. A comedian who didn't even know the circumstances.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
was out of line.
That's
So,
yeah, I think so. I think that's a good note to end it on, Steve.
all right,
This is a
man.
longer one,
Yeah.
but this was so fun. I love talking about this stuff with you and getting
Ah,
into it, and it's been
dude,
great.
it's cool, man. It's cool. I am gonna take. I mean, I've got I have too much going on as it is, but this kind of gets me excited about at least starting to think about some fiction stuff. I really would love to do the National Novel Writer Month in November, um,
Yeah.
which is a pretty cool thing. I thought about it for a few years now, but I didn't get to it in enough
Isn't it like
time.
a certain amount of hours you write or pages or what is it?
No, well, there may be some more, like, actual I'll have to dig into it. There may be some, like, actual guidance around some of that stuff. The broad stroke of it is you write a novel during the month of November.
Oh,
But I was reaching a I was researching about it last time. A lot of the people who do this, and a lot of people do this every year, they will, especially your outliner types, they will go ahead and prep for it, like beforehand. So it's like when November starts, they actually start the writing. It's not like they start thinking about their novel in November and then by November 1 and then by the end they're done.
right.
There's a lot of thought that goes into it.
Yeah,
I
it goes
think many of them throughout the year, a lot of thought that goes into it. And then they devote November to the writing of it
gotcha.
in general. So it's
Those people
interesting. I
must not have kids.
Yeah, must not, but you can even find, like, tons and I was looking them up last time, you can find tons of YouTube videos, people who have tips on how to do this and stuff, and so,
They do the
well,
same
I
thing
mean
with video games too. They call them, I think they just call them jam sessions where you get together with people and
yeah,
sometimes it's
mm,
24, 48, or 72 hours, I think, and you make a video game.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but
Alright,
all right, see, it's
well,
been
man.
great. It's been great.
Yeah, man, take care.
See ya.